Good morning, friends, colleagues, Thicketers, old and new, and welcome to the third week of talks of the Thicket Forum 2021. This week, on the 17th of June, we will be celebrating the World Day to Combat Drought, Land Degradation and Desertification. So we thought it would be fitting to speak about land degradation this week. So my talk is titled Reflections on Turning the Tide on Land Degradation and Subtropical Thickets. My name is Kyra Lunderstedt, and I work at the United Nations Development Programme, but specifically on a Global Environment Facility funded project on sustainable land management. So if we want to look at land degradation in South Africa as a start, I think it's important to focus on an environmental performance index that was created by Yale University. And it's important to know that in terms of environmental performance, South Africa is actually ranked only 142nd out of 180 countries globally. And our scores on ecosystem vitality showed that we ranked 117th for biodiversity and habitat protection and conservation, yet 30th for sustainable agriculture. But despite this, a South African land degradation assessment, or the LADA assessment in 2011, showed that in our country, moderate, severe, and very severe degradation exists in the country, with 30% moderate degradation and 18% severe degradation and very severe degradation of 6%. And when we speak of land degradation, it's defined as a negative trend in land condition, and this is caused by both direct and indirect human-induced processes, including climate change, a long-term reduction in biological productivity, ecological integrity, or value to humans. Land use and land cover change are the major drivers of land degradation globally, and unsustainable land management in certain industries can accelerate the rate and the severity of degradation over time. In this map of land use and agricultural potential developed with the Roads Restoration Research Group, we can see that in the STEP planning domain, which is this gray area over here, there's huge current land use and agricultural potential for economic productivity. And this is around commercial agriculture, orchards, as well as commercial pineapple. And in terms of agricultural potential, which is this legend over here, we can see that goats predominate the communal areas over here. They also exist around Janssenville, as we know from, those of us know from land degradation maps. But it also has potential for game. So if we look at these specific industries, the mohair industry covers 10 million hectares in the Eastern Cape, and there's a large communal dependence on goats for livelihoods. In the dairy industry, the 27% of production nationally comes from the Eastern Cape, with a high density along the coastline. The citrus industry, what I managed to find was that about 17,000 hectares of registered exporters existed in 2017, with covering 28% of the national exports. And in the pineapple industry, 75% of the national production comes from the Eastern Cape. By taking a look at land use and agricultural potential, it helps us to interpret the transformation and degradation within the subtropical thicket, as these are drivers of degradation. According to the STEP transformation assessment in 2002, of all the vegetation units that were assessed, more than 70% were quantified to be severely to moderately degraded. And of the solid thicket types, more than 42% of these were severely degraded or transformed. So this excludes your mosaic thicket types. When we look at the map, the dark gray areas represent where thicket occurs, and the STEP transformation assessment shows up in these dark red areas. But in addition, we've added the Natural Resource Atlas from ARC, where your yellow areas are degraded and your orange areas are transformed rangeland. So this map correlates quite well with the land use. So we know that in the Janssenville area, there is degradation from the mohair industry. Around the Sundance River Valley, the citrus industry correlates well with the transformed rangeland in this area, and the yellow area correlates with degraded rangeland from goats. So we know that once degraded, thicket is unable to recover or be restored back to a pristine state. So what has happened in the last 19 years since this assessment was conducted in 2002? So while there are certainly gains and improvements in sustainable land management, what we're also finding is that there are further losses. So an assessment of over 109 degraded plots from the Addo-Baviaans Fish River project, and this was work done with the Roads Restoration Research Group through my master's, it showed that from degraded spekboom veld and spekboom thicket, largely degraded from goat browsing, there was landscape heterogeneity of degraded lands, but a local homogenization of species showing little recovery. So what this means is that across all the regions of Baviaans, Kamdaboo, and Addo Elephant National Park, these areas were different in their degraded lands from site to site. But at a local level, when looking at a specific site's degradation, there was large similarity from one plot to another. And this is very important to know when we want to look at restoration and rehabilitating degraded areas. In terms of transformation and further losses, an assessment of the Alexandria region, which is largely used for the dairy industry, it showed that there was a decline in tree cover between 2001 to 2016 of over 1,600 hectares, which equates to 106 soccer fields lost per year. In the citrus industry of the Gamtus River Valley and the Lower Sundays River Valley, in 10 years, 331 hectares was lost in the Gamtus River Valley and 3,000 hectares in the Sundays River Valley over 19 years. Furthermore, a prelim assessment in the Kawi River Valley showed a transformation of 1,126 hectares over 17 years, resulting in about an average of 66 soccer fields per year, although it must be noted that this may be of recovered old fields. Based on this background to subtropical thicket degradation and degradation as a whole, SDG 15 Life on Land aims to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation and biodiversity loss. And this might get complicated, so I'm going to try to explain it as best as I can. But SDG 15, and specifically Target 15.3, that aims to combat desertification, restore degraded land and soil, including land affected by desertification, droughts, and floods, would also, if achieved, contribute to other sustainable development goals, such as no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation, as well as climate action. In 1992, 3 Rio Conventions were launched. These included the United Nations Convention on Climate Change, the United Nations Convention's Combat Desertification, and the Convention on Biological Diversity. So these are the UNFCCC over here, UNCCD, and the CBD. So what this diagram shows is that sustainable land management is at the heart of achieving the targets of the 3 Rio Conventions. This is over here. So in terms of the UNFCCC, there are certain nationally determined contribution targets. For UNCCD, there are land degradation neutrality targets. And for the CBD, there are Aichi targets, which were aimed to be achieved by 2020. So now we look at post-2020 Aichi targets. And what each of these aim to do is firstly to stabilize and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to combat desertification, and to conserve biological diversity. And through SLM, which responds to climate change mitigation and adaptation, as well as drought and land degradation, desertification, and conservation of biological diversity, we can achieve these 3 targets through also ecosystem-based adaptation. So if we look at this in terms of South Africa and Thicket, the nationally determined contributions aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the EFOLU sector, which stands for Agriculture, Forestry, and Land Use Sector. And when we look at this specifically for thickets in the documentation, the aim is to reduce the rate of or prevent land conversion while still promoting economic growth. So what the document states is that we need to restore 500,000 hectares of subtropical thicket. And I put restore in italics because it's quite a loaded word. And then in terms of the 2020 IT targets, we can achieve this through adopting a green stimulus framework, and this is built around natural capital accounting, so valuing our ecosystem services and investing in restoration to conserve biological diversity. And we can do this through ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solutions to improve ecosystem function and resilience. And then lastly, in terms of land degradation neutrality, this aims to create a balance between anticipated degradation, which I've just referred to as losses in the previous slide, as well as our planned positive actions where we can gain more land and create a neutral balance between restoration and degradation. So Thicket is seen in the land degradation neutrality report as a degradation hotspot. Yet despite this, it only requires the rehabilitation and management of 87,621 hectares of thicket. So ultimately, synthesizing these UN Rio conventions together, it boils down to avoiding, reducing, and reversing land degradation, which is synonymous with the launch of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, where we aim to prevent, halt, and reverse land degradation. Earlier, I referred to the land degradation neutrality targets, and what LDN aims to do is increase human well-being, improve food security, and promote healthy ecosystems. And this can be done by creating a level balance, otherwise known as neutrality, between new degradation, or your losses, and reversing past degradation, which is your gains. And the way that this can be done is, again, avoid, reduce, and reverse land degradation. And the way that we can avoid or reduce new degradation is via sustainable land management. And I would also add in there protection of ecosystems, as well as reversing past degradation through restoration and rehabilitation. So what does sustainable land management actually entail, and also what does restoration entail? So when we go into sustainable land management, which I will refer to as SLM, it's defined as the use of land resources. And land resources here include your soils, your water, animals and plants. And this is for the production of goods to meet changing human needs and ensuring that simultaneously we can achieve the long-term productive potential of these resources to maintain environmental functions. There are many facets to sustainable land management that enhance the ecosystem services. But when we specifically look at the restorative continuum, and this is a diagram provided by the Society of Ecological Restoration, we can see that there are different phases of restoration to improve biodiversity, ecological integrity, and ecosystem services. So firstly, the important thing is to reduce impacts. So reduce societal impacts and improve ecosystem management. So this is specifically referring to sustainable land management. And in so doing, we can repair ecosystem function and processes, which they refer to then as remediation. And then we go into rehabilitation, where we can initiate native recovery through vegetation recovery and planting, say, for example, speckboom, and then going into ecological restoration, where we can partially or fully recover native ecosystems or indigenous ecosystems to their intact or pristine reference state. Okay, so now that we've gone through some of that information, just describing sustainable land management and ecosystem restoration to achieve land degradation neutrality, so avoid, reduce, and reverse land degradation, I thought it would be good to just provide an example from our work in the Baviaanskloof. So here we are working with the Living Lands in Baviaans, who are really fantastic on the ground implementers, and we recently had a really great field trip to the landscape, so I thought I would share with you what they're doing. So firstly, in terms of sustainable land management, they're adopting multiple approaches based on research and adaptive management, and one of these is planting instant bush clumps. So in the nursery they are growing trays of grass seed and succulents and developing a good soil layer that they're then planting in bush clumps within the landscape, or at least due to plant them, so we'll see how that goes. And they're erecting multiple silt traps along these slopes to reduce the rate of land degradation and capture sediment down the slope, as well as on your more flat and gentle slopes doing ponding, brush packing, and planting of speckboom. So you can see the spec boom here has a really nice fringe from the brush, and you can see the brush at the bottom there. And then in addition to this, they're also doing conservation agriculture. So on some old fields, instead of planting spekboom, which we realized it hasn't had much survival due to the drought, they're investing in planting lucerne and other fodder crops. And in this way, there is a food source for the livestock for the communal areas that we're working on. And it also reduces the pressure on the natural veldt. And in addition, they have fenced a portion of land for habitat protection. So this is then your avoided degradation. So here we can see that in the Baviaanskloof, the team from Living Lands are avoiding land degradation, reducing land degradation, and reversing land degradation. But an important component of this is also looking at the social ecological system. And the Living Lands team are great at investing in people. They've built a lot of trust on the ground, and they're addressing the on-the-ground needs that can contribute to socio-economic productivity and environmental sustainability. So by looking at the socio-ecological system, looking at the different needs, we can really see what's needed then to create the enabling environment for sustainable land management adoption. And some of the ways that we can create an enabling environment is through financing, investments into restoration, and incentives for sustainable use. So one of the things that we are working on at the moment is a SLM national finance strategy with Wilderness Foundation Africa and the Sustainable Landscape Finance Coalition, which will be released later this year. We also need to look at the willingness of land users to engage in and adopt SLM practices, build an enhanced capacity and improve resource availability, and then also strengthen and participate in active cross-sectoral governance systems. So we really are unable to achieve SLM unless there is adequate financing, adequate resources, to monitor SLM, to monitor degradation and transformation. We need to have willing people on the ground who are interested in the environment and sustainability and enhancing their productivity. But we also need a really strong governance system within these landscapes to achieve sustainable land management and LDN. So with all of that said, do you believe that we are on a positive trajectory to achieve land degradation neutrality, to achieve ecosystem restoration, and to reduce degradation? And I believe that we are. I think we are making huge strides towards the gains of land degradation neutrality. There are huge pushes towards protected area expansion through biodiversity stewardship, declaration of protected environments, investments in the wildlife economy, and gains in various restoration efforts from spekboom rehabilitation projects, projects to remove bush encroachment and alien invasive species. However, to ensure the sustainability of these interventions and expansions, these need to be maintained long-term through SLM and various management plans. In addition, WWF recently released a report on the eco-awakening of how environmental issues are affecting human well-being. And I think that people are more aware than ever, especially post-COVID-19, of the effect of the environment on their well-being. And this really affects individual choices and patterns of consumption, which ultimately puts pressure on the producer to not only green the value chain, but also practice good land management. And this is within everybody's best interest. And furthermore, there is a green recovery post-COVID-19 with more people interacting with nature, exploring and supporting local tourism, and promoting sustainability. And I think we need to just observe that in the next 10 years, we are the generation restoration, and we can achieve these really big targets and improve sustainability on the ground, protect our thicket, protect our biodiversity, promote economic productivity and sustainability, and achieve the SDGs by 2030.